Good morning, and welcome back to another episode of the Red Chip Poker Podcast. My name is James Sweeney, aka Split Suit, and I'm one of the co-founders here at Red Chip Poker. In this episode, we're diving deep into a mental trap that plagues almost every single poker player, the Hindsight Reflex. Ever found yourself saying, I knew I shouldn't have called after seeing your opponent turn over the nuts, or convincing yourself that your hero call was genius just because it worked out? If so, you're not alone. This episode is for poker players of all levels who want to refine their decision-making process and break free from results-oriented thinking. You'll learn why we often misjudge our choices based on outcomes, how to separate strategic errors from mindset leaks, and the key questions you should be asking yourself after every big hand. By the end of this episode, you'll have a clearer understanding of how to analyze hands objectively, improve your poker mindset, and make more plus EV decisions, no matter the result. With that said, here's Coach Weasel to break it all down. Enjoy.
What is up, guys? Welcome to the Red Chip Poker Podcast. The title of this episode is Hindsight Reflex. I'd like you to imagine the following situation: 6-max online cash game, 100 big blind effective stack, and hero opens UTG with ace-king offsuit. The big blind 3-bets to around 10 big blinds, hero 4-bets to 25 big blinds, and big blind jams all in for 100 big blind effective. Hero deliberates for a while and finally decides to make the call against the 5-bet. Villain shows pocket kings, hero goes on to lose the entire pot. Now, the hand itself may not seem that interesting, but there's a lot that's potentially going on here behind the scenes. Let's imagine, for example, our hero reacts in the following way. He sees the pocket kings. Internally, or perhaps out loud, he screams, I knew I shouldn't have called in that situation. Perhaps hero then continues to berate himself. I should have known he wasn't 5-betting light in that situation. That was such a terrible decision. I knew I should have folded in that situation. Perhaps this is even an internal dialogue that you've engaged in with yourself at the poker tables. Because if you have, it's something that's very, very common to poker players. Click cool, see the bad news. I knew I shouldn't have called in that situation. Here's the interesting thing though. Let's rewind the clock back 30 seconds and let's pretend that we can change the past. This time, the same opponent, same set of circumstances, same action, same stats, same reads. Our opponent shows up with ace-10 suited. Hero now makes the call against the 5-bet with his ace-king. He sees the good news. Villain has ace-10 suited. Hero has him dominated. Hero's ace-king holds. He wins the entire pot. What does Hero shout out this time, internally or externally? I knew that Villain was 5-bet shoving light here in this spot. I'm so sick at this game. What a great call that I've just made with my ace-king in that scenario. Now, does that seem odd to you? Exactly the same situation, same opponent, completely different reaction after seeing what Villain shows up with. The problem here is that there's clearly a flawed process in place because that decision to call against the 5-bet, it was either the right decision or it was the wrong decision. The results don't change that. But the way that Hero's interpreting the quality of that decision is changing dramatically based on whether Villain shows up with kings or whether he shows up with ace-10 suited. And it shouldn't be that way. Our analysis of whether our decision was correct should not change dramatically after we see what our opponent has. Sometimes a surprising result should provoke a subtle reevaluation of our strategy in that scenario. For example, our opponent shows up with a hand that we didn't expect him to have in his range. That might be an invitation for us to revisit our opponent's tendencies. It might be a good idea to bring up some solver output. It might be a good idea to have a look at pool tendencies. But we shouldn't drastically shift our interpretation of whether our decision was good based on the outcome. In fact, we have a word for it in poker. It's referred to as results-oriented thinking. If our decision works out, we have a tendency to assume that it was a great decision. If it doesn't work out, we assume that it was an absolute terrible decision and we should have taken the opposite action. Now, we can clearly see that there is a flawed mental process in place here for Hero. But the thing is, it's still not clear exactly where the flaw lies in the process. You see, at this stage, this is not necessarily a mindset issue. It might be a mindset issue, but it could also be a strategic issue, and it could be a logistical issue. We can see that something's not quite right, but we need to go through a process of questioning to understand why the process was flawed. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but let's go through a set of questions that may help to reveal where the issue lies with Hero's decision to call against the 5-bet preflop. So here's the first question. Why did you make the decision that you did? So you can ask this question to yourself if you've ever made a decision and immediately reacted in a way such as, I knew that was a terrible decision, I shouldn't have done that. You can also follow this step-by-step questioning process. First question, why did you make the decision that you did? And really what we're looking for is a technical answer here. I expect to have at least 42% equity against my opponent's 5-bet jam range. Therefore, I think I'm committed in terms of pot odds. That's an example of a good answer. It's based on data. It's based on math. It's logical. Problem occurs here if you're not really sure why you made the decision that you did. When you actually think about it, it was more of a reaction to the scenario that you were in, and you don't really know what the full reason why you made that play was. Maybe you're not even sure what the standard line is in that situation. Then again, there's another reason why maybe you don't know why you made that decision. It could be a logistical reason. Maybe you're playing too many tables. Maybe you didn't follow the action correctly. Maybe you misread the action. Maybe you are feeling tired. Maybe you need to regulate your sleep patterns. See, there could be a logistical issue here in place. But we should be able to answer this question. I mean, anytime we make a decision at the poker table, we need to be held accountable for that. We need to have a logical process. There has to be a very explicit reason why we take certain actions. And if your answer is you don't know why you did what you did, well, you've got a problem there. That's either logistical or it could be strategic. You just don't know what the best play is. If you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, then in the moment you have to guess. You only have, let's say, a 30-second time bank. So if you're not sure, you've got to pick one of the options there, even if you're not sure whether it's the right option. So if your answer is, why did you make the decision? You don't know what the right play is. Well, you can see that actually this may be more of a strategic issue. It's not necessarily a mindset issue. We need to have a look at what our standard line should be in that situation. Now, that is the next question we should ask ourselves. What should the standard play be in this scenario? And what is the evidence? In other words, it's good if there's some mental incongruence of a certain situation, just to recap on what the standard line should be and how you know that should be the standard line. So for example, if in our example situation, the standard line is to call against the 5-bet, we could justify that by saying, I have the pool 5-bet jamming range here in population data. Here's the amount of equity Ace King has against that. We have evidence. We can justify the standard line in the situation. Now, if you don't know what the standard play is in a certain scenario, that's now an invitation to improve the strategy aspect of your game at that particular node. We need to really, in most spots, above 90% of situations, have a standard line and know exactly what we're doing. Now, the other reason why we ask this question, what should the standard play be in this scenario, is because maybe you made a certain decision in the moment that you know contradicts to the standard line, but you had a specific reason why you did it. So let's say, for example, that the standard play is to fold the Ace King against the 5-bet. And we're not saying it is, by the way, because when you have a look at solver output, you see that Ace King offsuit should actually be calling in that situation. So that's an example of evidence that the standard line should actually be to call against the 5-bet, assuming we 4-bet Ace King from under the gun. But let's say, for example, that a certain type of hand, solver says we should be folding to the 5-bet, but we deliberately decided to call against the 5-bet. And that ties us into question 3. Can any deviations be backed up with a logical reason? Okay, you called a hand that you're not supposed to. Why did you do that? Do you think your opponent's 5-betting wider than the player pool? If so, can you prove that? Can you demonstrate that with HUD stats? Because if it's just a feeling that you have that maybe your opponent was a bit wider this specific hand, but you can't really back that up with a logical reason, well, that's not even really a strategy error now. That's probably more of a mindset issue. It's almost like you wanted it to be true that your opponent was jamming wider in that situation. But if you don't have any logic or data to back up your decision, well, you're not really playing poker, you're actually gambling. Another question, how do you feel about the standard line? That really sounds like you're in a therapy session, doesn't it? How do you feel about the standard line? The reason why we ask this question is because there can be a disconnect between what you've been told the correct play is and what you feel the correct play is intuitively based on your years of experience as a poker player. Could even be that you've taken a session with a poker coach, you've watched a training video, and they've said, okay, you really should be doing this in this certain situation, but that conflicts with what you already believe in that situation. So anytime you're in that situation, you're conflicted. You're thinking, okay, I know I'm supposed to do this, but I don't really know if that's really the right option, so I'm just going to do this. Maybe sometimes you take the option you're supposed to, sometimes you don't. But you can see there's a conflict there. And it's easy to think, well, this is a mindset issue. You just need to do the right thing. But actually, it's not really a mindset issue. It's partly a mindset issue, but it's really more of a strategic issue. We need to revisit the strategy until we become fully convinced that a certain play is the right play. If we're being told that a certain option is the correct option, how can we demonstrate that? Take a look at solver output. We run some empirical analysis using our tracking software. We have a look at pool tendencies to see whether reasonably the play we're being advised to make is actually going to generate a positive expectation. So if we don't feel okay with the standard line, we feel that it should be losing, this is really more of a strategic issue. It's not really a mindset issue. It may present itself as feeling like a mindset issue, but it's actually not. Question 5, were you playing with a specific agenda? I really like this term agenda. It's a term that I've heard mentioned in other mindset resources. So an agenda is when you're really playing to achieve something that you don't really have control over whether you can actually achieve that thing. Simple example is that you're stuck in a session, you are down a few stacks. And now as you play, at the very least on a subconscious level, you are playing to win those few stacks back. And furthermore, mathematically, it doesn't make sense. I mean, let's say, for example, mathematically, to make those 3 stacks back, you'd maybe have to play, let's just say 5,000 hands. It depends on your win rate. And you know you only have time to play 1,000 more hands before you have to go to work or go to wherever, quit your session. So mathematically, it should take 5k hands. You've got 1k hands, but you want to make back those 3 stacks. Now you're playing with an agenda. You're not just here to make the best decision. You want to see if you can engineer an artificial win to try and get back those 3 stacks. What's going to happen? You're going to end up forcing the action. There are going to be situations that you know aren't quite plus EV, but they might give you the opportunity to double up your stack and maybe get back to where you were at the start of the session. This is an example of playing with an agenda. So you may find that, let's just say in a pre-flop stack-off situation, to keep the same example, we know we're supposed to fall against the 5-bet, but subconsciously we need to win those 3 stacks back. So let's just see if we can use up our 1 time and cool here. Yes, it's minus EV overall, but if we just win this 1 time, then we're closer to achieving our specific agenda. Now, if you answer yes to this question, well, that's actually more of a mindset problem because we understand that that's not how poker works. We can't just gamble more and expect to necessarily have a positive expectation as a result. Most likely thing that's going to happen if we're taking minus EV stack-offs is that we're going to end up even further stuck, which can then complicate any existing mindset issue even further. Next question, how do you feel about the result? This really is a mindset-based question. You could even take kings versus aces as a simple example for this. We 4-bet kings, we call against the 5-bet with our kings, our opponent has aces. Now, of course, we know that some of the time our opponent is going to show up with aces. It's all a standard part of the game. Are we 100% okay with that? At the very least, and of course, no one likes losing with their kings against aces, but the more neutral you can feel in that scenario, honestly, probably the better. If we're having an intensely negative reaction to something that should be a standard part of the game, that's indicative of a mindset issue. So ideally, it really shouldn't move the needle too much. And I say shouldn't move the needle too much because I don't know if there are players out there who feel absolutely nothing when their kings runs into aces. There could be 1% frustration in your mindset, and I think that just means you're a normal person. If you are at 0%, then congratulations. Perhaps I should be communicating with you in binary. The problem really occurs when you stack off in a standard kings versus aces situation, and you know that that stress needle, if it were to be measured, is jumping up to 50%. You're having an intensely negative reaction to something which really should be a standard result in the grand scheme of things. That's why we ask the question, how do you feel about the result? Finally, what is the plan for the next time a similar situation arises? So it's good to just reiterate what the standard line is for dealing with that specific situation that you've just dealt with. Set it as a clear plan for next time. Next time when the situation does arise, it's going to be a lot easier, at least on a rational level, to know what you're supposed to be doing. And if it's very clear on a rational level what you're supposed to be doing, then your issue is no longer strategic. And if you can execute and not feel bad, regardless of the results, then you don't even have a mindset issue. But if the strategy side of things is okay, but you're still cursing at yourself when the result is not good, well, now you've clearly identified that you have a mindset issue, not a strategic issue. It's very good to be deliberate about grouping issues into strategic issues and mindset issues. You see, it's a really serious problem if we have a strategic error, but we chalk it up to a mindset error. So to go back to that ace-king hand, Hero is telling himself that he's such a terrible player and he should have known he was supposed to fold to the 5-bet preflop. So in Hero's mind, it's a mindset error. He was supposed to fold, but he didn't fold. But the thing is, when we have a look at solver output, for example, we see that in that scenario, ace-king is supposed to call against the 5-bet. Now, it could be that in some pools, it still should be a fold pre-flop. But the point is, our standard line has to be based on something. If strategically we don't know whether we should be calling against the 5-bet or folding against the 5-bet, but then criticizing ourselves heavily for a mindset problem when it doesn't work out, well, it's not really a mindset problem. Or at least it's not exclusively a mindset problem. Maybe we have a mindset problem as well if we're heavily criticizing ourselves. But this is actually a strategic issue. And this is why we have to separate the two as much as possible, because to some extent they are inseparable. Most mindset issues have roots in strategic misunderstandings. See, that ace-king example, it's actually a strategic problem. It's manifesting as a potential mindset issue. Hero believes it's a mindset issue, but it's not. It's a strategic issue. And the interesting thing is, as we improve the strategy, as we gain greater clarity on how we should be acting in certain nodes, those mindset problems have a propensity to clear themselves up. It's funny how that works, right? That's because they were never really mindset issues. They were strategic issues that were manifesting themselves as mindset problems. This is one of the things I always wonder about, specifically working with a mental coach who doesn't necessarily play poker to a high level. You see, if you take that example hand we discussed at the beginning of the session, the ace-king hand, for example, and you tell your mental game coach, so I had this ace-king, I know I should have folded against the 5-bet, I'm such an idiot, I should have just folded, I knew the guy was not 5-betting light, but I just called anyway. What's the mental coach going to tell you? The mental coach is going to help you work with your mindset so that in future, you can now make sure that you make that fold repeatedly. But the thing is, that fold may not even be the right option. We've just said that GTO calls in that situation, probably correct to call against the 5-bet. How does the mental game coach know whether it's a strategic error or not? Unless they also play poker, they're not going to know. They just have to take your word for it that you should have folded in that situation. It's 100% guaranteed you should have folded, but you just couldn't click the fold button because your mindset's so messed up. I don't mean to be disparaging to mindset coaches. There's probably a lot of value you can get from working with a mindset coach. And, certainly they have areas of expertise that maybe the average poker player doesn't have. So we're not saying that you shouldn't work with a mindset coach. It's good to understand the relationship between mindset issues and unknown variables. Poker is a game of incomplete information. So it's different from something like chess, for example, where you can see all of your opponent's pieces. Everyone knows exact game state. Poker is a game of incomplete information because you don't know what your opponent's whole cards are. You have to guess at his range or make logical deductions regarding his range. That's why we say it's a game of incomplete information. If you want to have a strong mindset, we have to be okay with dealing with uncertainty, and we want to do that in an accurate way. To give you a simple example, let's imagine that we're trying to make a decision during a hand of poker. Let's just say for simplicity's sake that there are 10 relevant data points, and in reality there's tens of thousands, even more data points that you could make use of. But let's just say in this simple hand of poker, there's 10 data points, but I only know 5 of the 10 data points. What is the best play based on those 5 data points? So we have to be completely comfortable with the fact that we don't know 50% of the picture. We only have half of the picture. But given that we know half the picture, what is the best play here? And a player with a strong mindset is going to be okay with that. A player with a not so strong mindset is going to try and find ways to try and fill in the 5 blanks here without having logical reasons for that. They're going to say, well, I think my opponent probably never has this hand because he would do this, even though that's not necessarily true. Here's the interesting thing though. Imagine that someone showed us the remaining 5 data points that were previously hidden. And based on those additional 5 data points, our decision should now completely change. So we know in reality, when we just had access to half the picture, the decision wasn't really that great. It's actually a bad decision. It just so happened to be the best decision we had given the data we had access to. But now that we see the whole picture, we actually see that the best play is the complete opposite. The thing is, it doesn't matter. We'd never want to change our original decision. It doesn't matter that our decision was ultimately bad because it was the best decision we could make given access to the data that we have. And the revelation of those additional unknown variables doesn't change the fact that the original decision was the best that we could potentially have made with the data that we have access to. Once again, it's a little bit similar to the ace-king hand we mentioned at the beginning. We don't know exactly what our opponent has, but as soon as we see what he has, then suddenly we assume that we made the wrong decision. Actually, no. If it was the correct decision with half of the data, it doesn't matter what the other half of the data is because we didn't have access to that at the time. Sometimes players get concerned that they should know things they don't. They don't know exactly what their opponent's range is, and it plays with their mindset because they think they should know these things. And if they're a better player, they would know these things. And that's where the tendency to try and fill in the blank data comes in, even if it involves making assumptions that aren't based on reality. Whereas a player with a good mindset, an experienced player, is okay with the uncertainty. They're okay with the fact that I don't actually know if this hand is in his range, but that's fine. I don't need that piece of information to make the best decision with the data that I have. It's also important for mindset to understand the irrelevance of marginal situations. You see, the example hand we looked at the beginning with the ace-king was deliberately a close spot. In reality, it doesn't really matter that much whether you call ace-king or fold ace-king in that scenario. The EV on the call is supposed to be positive by a few big blinds, but that's solver output. It doesn't necessarily map to reality. If our opponent's 5-betting a bit tighter than solver thinks he is, then we're dealing with a 0 EV situation, maybe even slightly negative. The point is, it's a marginal situation, and therefore it's mostly irrelevant. The problems occur when our mindset starts telling us that irrelevant situations are hugely relevant to our win rate. So we start thinking that this hand with the ace-king is really important. Wow, that's just killed my win rate. I knew I should have folded in that situation. What a terrible play. That just shows complete lack of understanding regarding what the expectation is in that scenario. The EV's 0. Okay, maybe you made the wrong decision. It doesn't change your win rate. It barely moves the needle. Having said that, what happens when you go and tell your mental game coach that this ace-king hand has destroyed my win rate for the day? I ended up down a whole stack because I made this terrible call with my ace-king against the 5-bet. Mental game coach with no awareness of strategy, he's just going to feed off your belief. Wow, yeah, that was a really bad call. I mean, that's what killed your win rate. We need to work on ways that you can make the big laydown with these types of hands in this situation. What should an ideal coach really be doing? It should be helping you understand the EV of that situation. Actually, here are the ranges involved. The EV is pretty much 0. So although there may be some underlying mental game issues, which a mental game coach can absolutely help you address with their understanding of the medical and psychological aspects of things, obviously this information that your EV is 0 and that your decision is irrelevant is fairly important to this particular situation. If you realize that actually that's not what killed your win rate, maybe it's a lot easier to deal with the results. Even if you had folded in that particular spot, guess what? Your win rate doesn't really even change over the long run. So if your mental game is telling you that it does, if you're reacting in a way that implies that situation is far more relevant than it really is to your win rate, well, it's a mental game problem, yes, but once again, it's a strategic misunderstanding because you're assuming that that spot's relevant to EV when it isn't. See, once again, if we understand the strategy side of things, mental game issues sometimes have a way of just clearing themselves up. Okay, let's think about some key takeaways from this session. Next time you're at the table and you experience a mental disconnect, like the one we described at the outset, it's like the results don't necessarily match up with the way that we think they should, or we're not really sure whether we should be calling or folding, or intensely criticizing ourselves when we see the result of a certain hand. First stage is to probe the issue as to whether it's strategy, mindset, or logistical. It's not necessarily a mindset issue. Just because you feel bad and you feel like you should have folded and you didn't, doesn't mean it's a mindset issue. Mindset might be part of the problem, but it may not even be the bigger part of the issue. Next step, identify the precise nature of the issue and create a plan. The reason why we emphasize the word precise is because even when you know it's a mindset issue, the next step is figuring out where did the mindset issue occur. In our ace-king example hand, did the mindset issue occur before the call button was clicked? Or did it occur after when the results were seen? And the answer could be different depending on the situation. It's really important to figure that out. Did the mindset issue occur before? Perhaps there's a disconnect between the standard line and what you think should be plus EV. Or perhaps it occurred afterwards. Perhaps you're reacting badly to the results. Maybe it's the way you interpret the results. Either way, it could be a mindset issue, but just calling it a mindset issue is not precise enough. We need to identify the precise nature of the issue, where it occurs, and create a plan so it's easier to understand how to act the next time we're in that same kind of scenario. Final takeaway here is to understand the link between strategy and mindset. I really love trying to separate the two, but the truth is you can't fully separate these. And that's why any decent discussion on mindset has to take in the strategic side of things as well. It's very difficult, in my opinion, to fully work on your mindset without also taking in relevant strategy information as it pertains to the scenario being discussed. Mindset issues have a root in strategic misunderstandings in many cases. Not always, but a large amount of the time you clear up the strategy issue, you also clear up the mindset issue. Final takeaway, improve your relationship with EV and unknown variables. It's okay if you don't know everything about your opponent's range. The key is really just being comfortable with that, not fighting against that, trying to fill in information with very, very assumptive ideas. By improve your relationship with EV, we mean if you're in a certain scenario, you're trying to figure out whether you should be calling or folding, don't just think in terms of black and white, this is a call, this is a fold. Think in terms of EV. Is it a marginal call? Is it clear call? Is it clear fold? Because if you know that a certain situation, the EV is very marginal anyway, it's going to make it a bit easier to accept the results because you understand in the big picture, it doesn't really change your win rate. All right, so hopefully you understand why this episode was called the Hindsight Reflex. Hope you found it interesting. Thanks very much for tuning in. This was Coach Weasel, and this was the Red Chip Poker Podcast.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully you enjoyed, and if you did, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. If you want to go even further into the topics we've discussed today, especially when it comes to improving your strategy and also fixing mental leaks, I highly suggest you sign up for Pro today. Your Pro membership gets you complete access to the GTO Ranges app, all of Core, and the entire Pro video library. For mental leaks, we have some really solid stuff from Dr. Gardner and hundreds of in-depth strategy videos too. Sign up today at redchip.poker/pro, that's PRO, and start overriding the Hindsight Reflex with deeper and more sound poker strategy. Again, redchip.poker/pro, or click the link in the description box. I look forward to seeing you over there, and in the meantime, good luck out there and happy grinding.